The silent chamber was a void given form, a sphere of polished obsidian that drank the light of the holographic star map shimmering at its core. Here, at the nexus of the galactic concordance, gravity itself seemed to hold its breath. High Sovereign Kalen of the Lumina, whose physical body was a mere anchor for a consciousness that perceived time in geological epochs, stood cloaked in robes of woven starlight, his ancient mind a maelstrom of disquiet. Before him the Sol system pulsed with a malevolent, silent energy, an anomaly the Concordance's deepest archives could not explain. For millennia, it had been a backwater, a system noted only for its unremarkable star and a single, noisy, primitive civilization confined to their lone cradle world. Then, silence. A century of absolute, impenetrable quiet. And now this. A bloom of faster-than-light signatures, not scattered and chaotic like a fledgling race taking its first stumbling steps into the void, but coordinated, precise, and utterly unreadable. They did not expand. They did not broadcast. They simply were. "It is an act of aggression," a voice like grinding rock echoed through the chamber. General Vorlag of the Cathar, a being of granite and fury, his 4 powerful arms crossed over a chestplate scarred by 100 campaigns, stepped from the shadows. His species understood the galaxy through the lens of conflict, of dominance and submission. To them, silence was not peace. It was the intake of breath before a killing strike. They have cloaked their system for a standard generation, no doubt to build their armadas in secret. Now they reveal themselves, a fleet of unknown strength poised on our border. They test our resolve. We must answer this provocation with overwhelming force, or we will be perceived as weak. From the opposite side of the chamber, a soft, chiming voice offered a counterpoint. Or we will be perceived as tyrants, striking at a shadow we do not understand. Emissary Lyra of the Cygnian Ascendancy drifted forward, her form a graceful confluence of light and fluid motion, her large, empathetic eyes fixed on the pulsing hologram. The Cygnians were telepaths, empaths, their society built on a foundation of shared consciousness and mutual understanding. "I have extended my senses toward their system, High Sovereign. I feel nothing. No anger, no fear, no ambition. It is a stillness so profound it is more terrifying than any war cry. It is the emptiness of a perfectly polished mirror reflecting only what is before it. To strike at such an enigma is to strike at ourselves." Kalen did not turn. His gaze remained locked on the representation of Earth's system, a place now designated anomaly. The Lumina had guided the Concordance for eons, their wisdom a steady hand on the tiller of galactic history. They remembered the rise and fall of empires, the birth of stars, and the death of species. But the humans were a discordant note in the grand cosmic symphony. The archives were strangely thin on their sector of space. There were mentions, of course, fragmented data shards from long-dead precursor races, whispers of a region of space best left undisturbed. But the core data, the clear, uncorrupted historical records, seemed to be missing, as if deliberately excised. What remained were cryptic, mythic warnings, dismissed by modern strategists as the fearful superstition of less enlightened times. "The archives of the Firstborn speak of them, though not by name," Kalen said, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in the very structure of the chamber. "They refer to them only as the Silent Watchers, the keepers of the final word. The texts are incomplete, corrupted by time, but the sentiment is one of awe and a deep, abiding fear. A fear not of conquest, but of judgment." Vorlag snorted, a plume of superheated gas venting from his multifaceted mandibles. "Myth and prophecy have no place in strategic calculus, High Sovereign. We are the Concordance. Our fleets are legion. Our technology is the pinnacle of millennia of shared progress. These humans are a single-system species who have just discovered the principles of light-speed travel. They are insects who have built a nest next to a leviathan. We must crush the nest before they sting." "An insect's sting can be venomous, General," Lyra countered, her ethereal form shimmering with gentle agitation. "And we do not know the nature of their venom. Their technology is a black box. Our long-range scans are being absorbed, not deflected, not jammed, but drawn in and nullified. The energy readings are flat. It is like staring into a hole in the universe. Such a feat should not be possible. It defies the known laws of physics." The debate was the same one that had raged for weeks in the high councils and military forums across the Concordance. The Cathar and their allies, the martial races, saw a threat to be neutralized. The Cygnians and the conclaves of science and philosophy saw a mystery to be unraveled, a potential source of knowledge or a cataclysm to be avoided through careful diplomacy. Kalen and the Lumina stood in the center, weighed down by the burden of a history that felt tantalizingly, terrifyingly incomplete. His own consciousness, a vessel of memories stretching back 1 million years, could find no parallel. Every other emergent species had been loud, chaotic, broadcasting their triumphs and fears into the void. They screamed their existence to the stars. The humans whispered theirs through an unnerving, perfect silence. General Vorlag's fleets are already mobilized at the border, Kalen stated, a subtle reprimand in his tone. The Cathar general did not flinch, for it was his nature to prepare for war just as it was a star's nature to burn. They will remain there, a shield against any potential hostility. Emissary Lyra, you will assemble a diplomatic envoy. The finest minds, the most accomplished linguists, the most stable and open-minded delegates the Concordance can offer. We will extend a hand of greeting. And if they answer with a fist, Vorlag pressed, his voice a low growl of impatience. Then the purpose of your shield will be made clear, Kalen replied, his voice leaving no room for argument. But we will not be the aggressors. We will not be the ones to cast the first stone into this silent pool. We are an alliance of enlightened species, General. We must act the part, even in the face of the unknown. The alternative is to become the very monsters our ancestors feared. Kalen gestured, and the hologram of the Sol system expanded, the blue-white marble of Earth coming into focus. It looked peaceful, unassuming, a jewel of impossible life hanging in the velvet dark. But as he stared, he felt a coldness creep into the core of his ancient being, a feeling he had not experienced in millennia. It was the primal fear of a locked room, the chilling certainty that something was on the other side, listening, waiting. The fear was not that the humans would be hostile. It was that the Concordance, in its power and its pride, was about to make a mistake of such cosmic proportions that the echoes of its failure would haunt the galaxy for ages to come. He thought of the fragmented precursor texts, the warnings of a power that did not conquer worlds, but weighed them. The silence from Earth was not the absence of sound. It was the sound of a held breath, and the entire galaxy was waiting for the exhale. The diplomatic fleet of the Concordance was a spectacle of power and grace, a collection of vessels that represented the pinnacle of a dozen civilizations. There were the crystalline spires of the Cygnian thought ships, shimmering with psychic energy. The brutalist, geometric bulk of the Cathar cruisers, their hulls plated with neutronium alloy, bristling with weapons batteries that could crack a continent. And at their heart, the Lumina flagship, the Stellarch's Wisdom, a vessel that seemed carved from a captured nebula, its form shifting and ethereal, more a concept than a physical object. They translated from hyperspace at the designated diplomatic distance from the Sol system's heliopause, a grand, intimidating arrival designed to convey both the might and the majesty of the Galactic Concordance. And the universe answered with silence. No welcoming committee, no defensive patrols, no transmissions of any kind. The human FTL signatures remained, a ghostly web of energy traces within the system, but the ships themselves were invisible, their presence felt but not seen. The void before the Concordance fleet was utterly, unnervingly empty. On the bridge of the Stellarch's Wisdom, the atmosphere was thick with a tension that transcended species. Kalen sat on his command throne, a seamless fusion of organic crystal and energy, his physical form a placid mask for the storm of calculations and historical precedents swirling within his mind. Lyra stood beside him, her form wavering slightly, a sign of her own deep psychic unease. Even Vorlag, observing from his own command ship light seconds away but present as a grim-faced hologram, was uncharacteristically quiet. The calculated absence of a response was a more powerful statement than any display of force. They mock us, Vorlag's hologram rasped, his four hands clenching and unclenching. This is a deliberate insult. They feign ignorance of our presence, a power play to seize the diplomatic initiative. It is not ignorance, Lyra whispered, her large eyes closed in concentration. It is patience, an inhuman patience. It feels like the stillness of a mountain before an avalanche. They are aware of us on every conceivable level. They are analyzing our ships, our energy outputs, the psychic resonance of our crews. They are learning everything about us, and we are learning nothing about them. Kalen raised a slender, luminous hand. We will proceed as planned, transmit the standard Concordance greeting package, the linguistic codices, the historical summaries, the declaration of peaceful intent. Transmit it on all frequencies in all known energy forms. Let there be no doubt as to our purpose here. The order was given. Beams of pure information, a data stream so dense it contained the entire cultural history of the Concordance, lanced out from the flagship toward the silent system. It was a gesture of immense trust, a bearing of the soul of their civilization. For a long, agonizing moment that stretched into an eternity, there was no reply. The Concordance fleet, a congregation of the most powerful ships in the known galaxy, floated in the void. Their grand gesture of diplomacy met with an indifferent emptiness. The tension on the bridge became a physical weight, crushing the confidence of the crew. Vorlag's hologram began to flicker with his rising fury. Then something changed. Not a transmission, not a ship appearing in a flash of light. It was more subtle. A single point of light detached itself from the distant orbital ring of Saturn. It was small, impossibly small, a mere speck against the vastness of space. It moved without any discernible propulsion, leaving no trail of energy, no distortion of spacetime that Concordance sensors could detect. It simply moved. It grew larger, resolving not into a warship or a sleek diplomatic courier, but into something stark, functional, and utterly alien in its design philosophy. It was a simple, dark gray cuboid, devoid of any markings, viewports, or visible technology. It was less a ship and more a piece of geometry given purpose. Scans, Kalen's voice was calm, but a current of urgency flowed beneath it. The chief sensor analyst, a crystalline being of pure data, responded, its voice a series of perfectly modulated tones. Negative, High Sovereign, the object is inert. It reflects no energy. It emits no energy. By all our metrics, it should not be capable of movement, yet it is approaching at a steady velocity. Shields are non-existent. Weapon signatures are non-existent. Life form readings are ambiguous. The human vessel came to a stop at a precise, respectful distance from the Stellarch's wisdom. It was dwarfed by the Lumina flagship, a pebble next to a cathedral. Yet its presence dominated the viewscreen, its stark, silent simplicity a profound and unsettling counterpoint to the ornate grandeur of the Concordance fleet. For another long moment, it did nothing. The crews on 1,000 ships held their breath. Then a transmission came. Not a broad, powerful broadcast, but a single, tightly focused beam of communication, directed solely at the Stellarch's wisdom. It contained no static, no preamble, no complex encryption. It was a simple audio-visual signal, and it spoke in perfect, unaccented high concordant, the complex language of diplomacy that took most species decades to master. "This is Ambassador Thorn of Unified Humanity," a voice said, calm, measured, and devoid of any discernible emotion. "I carry the word of my people. With your permission, I will come aboard your vessel to speak with your leadership." The bridge was stunned into silence. Not a request for a parley in neutral space, not a demand for the Concordance to send an envoy. A single individual, offering to place himself, unarmed and unprotected, in the very heart of the fleet that had come to his doorstep. It was either an act of supreme foolishness or a display of confidence so absolute it bordered on arrogance. "It is a trap," Vorlag's hologram boomed instantly. "He will carry some form of biological or technological plague. Do not allow him aboard." "It is a gesture of trust," Lyra countered, her form glowing with a soft, hopeful light. "He is mirroring our own act of sending the greeting package. To refuse would be an insult of the highest order. It would prove us to be the fearful primitives he may already suspect we are." Kalen considered the options. The risk was immense, the potential reward immeasurable. To understand the enigma of humanity, they had to engage with it. Prepare the grand diplomatic chamber, extend the invitation, let the human ambassador come aboard, alone. The transfer was as unnerving as everything else the humans had done. There was no docking procedure, no shuttlecraft. One moment the human ship was inert. The next, a single human form materialized on the transporter pad in the grand diplomatic chamber, coalescing from a shimmer of light without any of the energy signatures associated with Concordance teleportation technology. The chamber was designed to awe. Its ceilings were a swirling vortex of captured starlight. Its walls were lined with the sigils of the founding member worlds, and the air itself hummed with a soft, calming psychic field generated by Signian adepts. The human stood there taking it all in. He was unremarkable, of average height for his species, dressed in a simple dark gray uniform that matched his ship, utterly devoid of rank insignia or decoration. His hair was short and graying at the temples, his face etched with lines that could have been from age or from a great, abiding weariness. His eyes, a pale, clear blue, were the only remarkable thing about him. They were ancient eyes, filled with a depth of knowledge and a profound sadness that seemed utterly out of place. He carried no visible equipment, no weapons, no diplomatic pouch. He was just a man, standing alone in the heart of a potential enemy's flagship. Kalen, Lyra, and a holographic Vorlag awaited him. The chamber was filled with a silent retinue of Lumina guards, their forms like statues of polished obsidian. Ambassador Thorn inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect that was both minimal and perfectly executed. High Sovereign Kalen, Emissary Lyra, General Vorlag, I am Thorn. I thank you for receiving me. His voice was the same as the transmission, impossibly calm, a placid lake in the midst of a galactic storm. You are welcome, Ambassador, Kalen said, his own voice a gentle tide against the human stillness. You have been silent for a very long time. Your sudden activity has caused a great deal of concern throughout the concordance. Silence is often mistaken for inaction, Thorn replied, his gaze sweeping over the three leaders, lingering for a moment on each. We have not been inactive, we have been listening, we have been learning, and we have been remembering. Vorlag's hologram bristled. Remembering what? How to build weapons in the dark, how to plot against your neighbors. Thorn's gaze settled on the Cathar general. There was no anger in his eyes, no fear, only a sort of weary pity. We remember the Cathar general. We remember when your people were not conquerors, but poets, carving epics into the mountains of your homeworld to honor the stars. We remember the great sorrow that drove you to reforge your society into a weapon, the loss of your twin world that turned your poetry to rage. Vorlag was struck dumb. The great sorrow was an event from his people's sacred history, a time of cosmic grief that was never, ever spoken of to outsiders. It was the core of their cultural identity, the secret pain that fueled their martial pride. For this human, this upstart, to speak of it with such casual, intimate knowledge was a violation of the highest order. Thorn then turned to Lyra. And we remember the Signians before their ascendancy, when your shared consciousness was a prison, a cacophony of a billion terrified minds trapped in a psychic storm. We remember the first empath who taught you how to harmonize, how to turn the storm into a symphony, an act of love that saved your species from madness. Lyra's form flared with brilliant, shocked light. The unspoken time, the prehistory of her people, was a thing of terror and shame, a memory so painful it was only accessible to the highest adepts. It was the foundational trauma upon which their serene, harmonious society was built. Finally, Thorn looked at Kalen. And we remember you, High Sovereign. We remember the Lumina not as wise overseers, but as desperate survivors, fleeing the ruin of your own galaxy, carrying the memory of a billion dead suns. We remember your long, lonely journey through the intergalactic void, and the vow you made to never allow such a catastrophe to happen again. Kalen felt the foundations of his ancient consciousness tremble. The origin journey was the most profound and sacred truth of his people, a secret kept even from the highest echelons of the concordance. It was the source of their wisdom, their patience, and their burden of responsibility. For this human to know it, it was impossible. The chamber was utterly silent, save for the faint hum of the ship. The human had not made a single threat. He had not boasted of his power. He had simply, calmly, and devastatingly stripped away the facades of the three most powerful beings in the room, revealing the secret hearts of their civilizations. How, Kalen finally managed to ask, his voice a whisper that echoed in the vast chamber. How can you know these things? These are not facts that can be gleaned from a data stream. This is soul knowledge. Because it is our function to know, Thorn said, his voice softening, taking on a tone of profound gravity. It is our burden. For the past century of our silence, we have been completing a project. We have connected with what we call the Echo Archives, a latent galactic-scale psychic field that holds the resonant memory of every civilization that has ever lived and died. Most species brush against it, interpreting it as religious insight, artistic inspiration, or madness. Your species have all touched it, and it has defined you. But we, humanity, we learned to read it. We are not just a civilization. We have become a library of ghosts. The horror of his words began to dawn on them, a slow, creeping chill that was far more terrifying than any declaration of war. You asked why the galaxy fears us, or why the ancient texts speak of us with such dread, Thorn continued, his pale eyes seeming to look through them into the deep past. It is not because we are conquerors. We have no desire for territory, for resources, for subjects. The fear is not of what we will do to you, but of what we will show you. He raised his hand, and a device no larger than a river stone materialized in his palm. He did not activate it, he simply held it. The concordance is powerful, it is proud, and it is standing on the edge of the same abyss that has swallowed every great civilization before it. Factionalism, arrogance, a belief in your own permanence, a refusal to learn from the past. You are repeating the same patterns, speaking the same words, making the same fatal errors. Our silence was not a preparation for war. It was a period of mourning for the war you are about to start with yourselves. Vorlag's hologram was rigid, his usual bluster replaced by a stunned, horrified disbelief. Lyra was trembling, the psychic implications of what Thorn described, an ocean of dead thoughts, a galaxy of screaming ghosts, threatening to overwhelm her. Kalen felt the weight of 1,000,000 years settle upon him, the wisdom he thought was his own revealed as a mere echo of a far greater, more tragic history. The horrifying secret of humanity, Thorn said, his voice now filled with an immense galactic-scale sorrow, is not our strength. It is our clarity. We see the cycles. We hear the echoes of the dead. We carry the memory of every fallen empire, every extinct species, every world burned to glass by its own children. We are feared across the stars for a good reason, General. We are feared because when you look at us, you are not seeing a new rival. You are seeing the ghost of your own future. He placed the small stone on the deck. That is a data repository. It contains the unabridged histories of the last 1,000 major civilizations to fall within this galactic arm. The Tzeng hegemony, the Kyrillic dominion, the star swimmers of Alcyone, all of them believed they were eternal. All of them are now dust and echoes. Their stories are now your inheritance. What you do with them is your choice. We will not interfere. That is not our way. We are not judges. We are merely witnesses. With that, Ambassador Thorn closed his eyes for a moment, and then his form dissolved into the same shimmer of light that had brought him, vanishing from the chamber as silently as he had arrived. He left behind a legacy of shattered pride, a terrifying new understanding of the universe, and a small, gray stone that held the weight of 1,000 dead worlds. The silence he left in his wake was 1,000 times heavier than the one that had preceded him. In the aftermath of Ambassador Thorn's departure, the grand diplomatic chamber became a mausoleum of broken certainties. The small, gray stone lay on the obsidian floor, a simple object that radiated a psychic weight, so immense it was almost a physical force. Vorlag's hologram stood frozen, the granite-like plates of his face a mask of utter shock, his entire martial philosophy rendered meaningless. He had prepared for a battle of ships and energy beams, but had been dismantled by a quiet history lesson. Lyra had sunk to her knees, her form a dim, flickering light, her empathic senses reeling from the residual sorrow that clung to the air where the human had stood. It was a grief so ancient and so vast that her own mind, accustomed to the symphony of 1,000,000,000 harmonious souls, could barely comprehend its scale. It was the grief of a parent who had outlived all of their children. Kalen remained on his throne, his ancient consciousness processing the impossible. The Lumina's secret pride, their belief that they were the sole inheritors of a forgotten wisdom, was a comforting lie. They were not unique survivors. They were merely the latest in a long, tragic line, their own origin story just one chapter in a galactic saga of ruin. The humans' words had not been a threat, but a diagnosis. The Concordance was sick, afflicted with the same hubris that had consumed empires whose names were no longer even whispers in the void. He looked at the stone, the repository of 1,000 failures, and understood that it was both a gift and a curse. "Activate it," he commanded, his voice strained, heavy with the gravity of the moment. "Project the contents into the chamber's hollow field." A technician, trembling, focused a low-energy beam on the stone. It did not respond like a normal data device. It seemed to absorb the energy, and then the chamber was filled not with charts or text, but with echoes, whispers, fragmented images that bloomed and faded in the air like smoke. They saw glimpses of crystalline cities shattering under the force of civil wars. They heard the psychic death screams of a hive-mind species turning upon itself, driven mad by a philosophical plague. They witnessed the last broadcast of a race of silicon-based life forms as their star. A project they had tried to tame went nova, their final message a song of regret. It was a torrent of endings, a library of apocalypses. The fall of the Tzeng hegemony was not a footnote in a history text. It was the personal memory of the last Tzeng emperor watching his palace burn, the smell of ozone and the taste of despair made real in the chamber's air. The extinction of the star swimmers was not a scientific curiosity. It was the feeling of cold, lonely darkness as the last of their kind dissolved in the interstellar medium, their song fading into the hum of the cosmic background radiation. The humans had not just recorded these events. They had preserved the experience of them. The raw, unfiltered sensory and emotional data. It was horrifying. It was profound. It was the most effective diplomatic statement ever made. Vorlag let out a choked, guttural sound, and his hologram dissipated. He could not bear to watch anymore. For a Cathar, a being defined by strength and the glory of conquest, to witness the ultimate futility of such ambitions, to see the ashes to which all empires returned, was to have the foundations of his soul torn out. Lyra, however, began to glow more brightly. As an empath, she was in agony, but it was a transformative agony. She was feeling the pain of 1,000 lost peoples, and through that pain, she was finding a new galactic-scale empathy. She was beginning to understand the burden of the humans, the crushing weight of being the sole inheritor of so much loss. "They do not hate us," she whispered, her voice filled with a newfound reverence. "They grieve for us, for what we are about to become." Kalen finally rose from his throne. He walked to the center of the swirling vortex of ghosts and memories. He reached out his hand, not to touch the images, but as a gesture of acknowledgement to the countless lives they represented. The human's words echoed in his mind. "We are not judges. We are merely witnesses." He had misunderstood. The fear the ancients felt was not of human power, but of human truth. The truth that the universe did not care for empires, that power was a fleeting illusion, and that the only thing that truly endured was the memory of what was lost. The humans were not a threat to be managed, but a mirror to be looked into, and the Concordance was terrified of its own reflection. "Recall the fleets," Kalen said, his voice resonating with a new, somber authority. "All of them. Send General Vorlag my personal commendation for his readiness, and then order his armadas to stand down. Our posture is no longer one of defense, it is one of contemplation." He turned to Lyra, his own ancient eyes mirroring the sorrow he saw in hers. "Emissary, you will draft a new message to the humans, not a diplomatic proposal but an apology, an acknowledgement of our arrogance and a request, not for an alliance of power but for a communion of understanding. We will ask them to teach us how to remember." This was the great reveal, not of a human superweapon or a hidden fleet, but of a moral and philosophical high ground so unassailable that it redefined the very nature of power in the galaxy. Power was not the ability to destroy, it was the ability to endure the truth. And humanity, by becoming the vessel for the galaxy's most painful truths, had become the most powerful civilization of all. They ruled not through force, but through the crushing authority of memory itself. The human response came a day later. It was, as always, simple and direct. Ambassador Thorne's calm face appeared on the main viewscreen of the Stellarch's wisdom. He was not on his ship, but in a room that seemed to be a simple study, lined with what looked like physical books. Behind him, a window looked out not on a starfield, but on a green landscape under a blue sky. It was a profoundly intimate and disarming setting. "High Sovereign Kalen," Thorne began, his tone holding a hint of warmth that had been absent before. "We have received your message. Your apology is accepted. Your request for communion is welcome. It has been a very long time since anyone has asked to learn rather than to conquer or to bargain." Kalen inclined his head. "We have been humbled, Ambassador. We have reviewed the archives you gifted us. It is a heavy burden to bear, even for a moment. That your people bear it always is a feat of spiritual strength we can barely comprehend." "It is not a choice," Thorne said softly. "It is a responsibility. We evolved on a world rich with the ghosts of our own past. We are a species that has always been haunted by its history, by its capacity for both great beauty and unspeakable cruelty. When we reached for the stars, we found that the universe was no different. Our unique sensitivity to the psychic echoes of the cosmos was not a strength we developed, but a condition we had to learn to endure. Our calmness is not a matter of temperament. It is a discipline, a necessary shield against a tide of unending sorrow." A new understanding settled over Kalen. Humanity wasn't just a library, it was a sanctuary. They were preserving these memories not as a warning, but as an act of profound respect for the dead, a refusal to let their stories fade into the final, absolute silence. Their entire civilization was a monument to lives that were no longer lived. "We will form a new council," Kalen declared. "A joint council between the Concordance and humanity. Its purpose will not be to govern, but to understand. We will listen to the echoes you have preserved. We will learn the lessons of the fallen, and we will forge a new future, one based not on the pursuit of power, but on the preservation of life." Vorlag, appearing again as a hologram, stepped forward. His usual aggressive posture was gone, replaced by a somber stillness. "The Cathar will pledge their fleets to this new purpose," he said, his voice a low rumble of conviction. "We have been the sword of the Concordance for too long. From this day forward, we will be its shield. We will defend the memory of the past, and we will protect the hope for a future you have shown us." It was a turning point in galactic history. The great, powerful concordance which had dominated the known galaxy for millennia was voluntarily setting aside its pride to become a student to a species it had been prepared to annihilate only days before. The human secret was out, and it had not led to war, but to a peace more profound than any treaty could have achieved. It was a peace born of shared humility and a common, terrifying understanding of the stakes. Thorn nodded a slow, solemn gesture of acceptance. This is a good beginning. Unity is the only thing that can defy the cycles of history, but I must warn you. The archives you have studied are incomplete. They tell the story of how civilizations fall, but they do not fully explain why. A sense of cold dread, a feeling Kalen was becoming disturbingly familiar with, returned. What do you mean, Ambassador? The echoes showed us. It was greed, fear, civil war, hubris. Those were the symptoms, Thorn corrected gently. Not the disease. There is a reason why so many brilliant, powerful civilizations across millions of years and thousands of light years all succumb to the same self-destructive patterns. They do not do so entirely on their own. Thorn gestured, and the view behind him changed. The peaceful landscape was replaced by a star map of the galaxy, one far more detailed and complete than any the concordance possessed. It showed the great spiral arms, the glowing core, and the vast, dark interarm voids. We call this the Veil of Silence, Thorn said, indicating the vast, sparsely populated regions between the spiral arms. The concordance believes these areas are empty, naturally devoid of life-bearing worlds. You are wrong. They are not empty. They are quarantined. He zoomed in on one of the dark voids. At its very center was a single point of energy, a faint, rhythmic pulse that concordance sensors had always dismissed as a naturally occurring phenomenon, a pulsar or a magnetar. That is not a star, Thorn said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a tone that carried the weight of a truth held for 100 generations. It is a signal, incredibly ancient, incredibly patient. We do not know what it is or what created it. We only know what it does, it whispers. Across the ages, it broadcasts a mimetic plague into the psyche of the galaxy. It doesn't use weapons or ships. It uses ideas. It finds nascent civilizations, and it offers them a shortcut. It whispers of ultimate power, of transcendence, of breaking the laws of physics. It promises them godhood. He zoomed back out, and 1,000 points of light flared on the map, 1,000 dead civilizations. They were all clustered around the edges of the spiral arms, as close to the veils as they could get. The signal drives them mad with ambition, Thorn explained, his face a mask of grim finality. It amplifies their natural flaws, Cathar aggression, Tzang pride, the early Signian psychic chaos. It coaxes them into building technologies they cannot control, into fighting wars for philosophical concepts they barely understand. It guides them, step by step, toward self-annihilation. Every civilization in the archives you viewed was a victim of this influence. They thought they were achieving their ultimate destiny. In reality, they were destroying themselves at the behest of an unseen puppet master. This was the final, horrifying secret, the twist that dwarfed everything that had come before. The conflicts, the rises and falls of empires, the great cycles of history, they were not entirely natural. They were engineered. The great filter was not a technological barrier or a law of nature. It was an active, malevolent intelligence. Ancestors detected this signal long ago, Thorn concluded. It drove humanity to the brink of its own self-destruction countless times, but our unique psychic resonance, our curse, allowed a few of us to hear the whisper for what it was. We recoiled. We turned inward. We began our long silence not just to listen to the dead, but to learn how to shield ourselves from this cosmic predator. Our duty, the one we have carried in secret for so long, is twofold. We remember the fallen. And we stand watch against the thing that made them fall. He looked directly at Kalen, his calm eyes now burning with a terrible, ancient purpose. The reason we have finally revealed ourselves to you, High Sovereign, is that the signal is getting stronger. It is beginning to seep into the more densely populated regions of the spiral arms. It is beginning to whisper to you. The growing factionalism in your concordance, the Cathar's rising militarism, these are not just political disagreements. They are the first symptoms of the infection. The bridge of the Stellarch's wisdom was silent as a tomb. Kalen, Lyra, Vorlag, they all stood frozen, looking at the galactic map, at the dark, cancerous voids that separated the shining arms of the galaxy. Their conflict with humanity, a conflict that had threatened to tear the concordance apart, was a meaningless prelude, a distraction. The real war had been raging in the shadows for eons, and they had not even known they were soldiers. Humanity was not just a library of the dead. It was the last sane asylum in a galaxy going mad. They were not just witnesses. They were the lonely sentinels on the longest watch in creation. And they were feared for good reason, for they carried the horrifying truth that the universe was not empty, but haunted, and that a predator of unimaginable age and power was patiently waiting for them all to fall. The alliance they had just forged was not a political victory. It was the desperate, last-ditch union of a few souls who had just looked into the true abyss and realized they were staring back at a hungry, intelligent eye. Their work was just beginning.